Hi, I'm Alan, and today in episode 2 of my From the Vault series, we're going to take a look at one of my favorite games. This is Final Fantasy II. Well, Final Fantasy IV in Japan, yeah. And you're watching OMRPG. Alright, let's talk Final Fantasy II. I played this game for the first time in 1992 when it was released for the SNES. Yep. I'm old, and it changed the way I look at games, especially RPGs, forever. So I'd played several RPGs before at this time in my life, most notably games like Dragon Warrior, the first Final Fantasy, as well as dungeon crawlers like Shadowgate. Check out my nifty review to that one right here. I don't know, one of those. But Final Fantasy II completely slayed it. Yeah, that's RPG pun there. I'm sorry. And it will be forever nestled in my stupid little brain and heart forever. This game had it all. Gorgeous, gorgeous 16-bit graphics, a story filled with loss, betrayal, hardship, and like twists around every freaking corner, and a battle system that was tight and addictive. What's also pretty interesting is this is not actually the second Final Fantasy. When this was released in Japan, it was actually Final Fantasy IV. Now, why in Hades would this be referred to as number 2 in the series? Well, mainly because RPGs just weren't that popular in the US and the West in general. Games mentioned before like Dragon Warrior and the first Final Fantasy. There's a very cool story about how the game got titled Final Fantasy in the first place, but let's not get into that right now. They were fairly popular, but just not enough to warrant the developers actually spend the time or resources to localize it for the Western market. That kind of market just didn't exist for these games. So when the mad scientists at Square, later to become Square Enix, yep, those guys, decided to give the Western market another shot, they decided to avoid confusion by just calling it Final Fantasy II, making it the Western sequel to the first game previously released on the NES. And I, for one, am forever thankful that they decided to release this for the SNES. So enough with the history lesson, what's this game all about? Well, for starters, Final Fantasy II is a turn-based RPG. This means each party member and enemy will take their turns doling out attacks, using items, casting spells, etc. At least that's what it usually is. The crazies over at Square wanted to shake that tried and true combat system by introducing the ATB system, or Active Time Battle System. This was a unique type of turn-based system where each character's ability to take a turn was based upon the ATB gauge filling up. When the gauge of each individual character or enemy was full, they would be able to perform some type of action, be it attacking, using magic, using items, guarding, or changing positions in the group lineup. Gone were the days of taking your sweet time and being able to virtually pause the game by just not executing command. Nope. This time around, you needed to be on your shit, cause when an enemy's ATB gauge, which by the way, you as the player couldn't even see, diabolical, was filled, they would attack like clockwork. This gave the combat a sense of urgency that was just not present in other RPGs at that time. While it could at times be frustrating, and more often than not made for engaging and interactive combat. As if the combat wasn't awesome enough, the writers of Final Fantasy II, Final Fantasy IV, pulled zero punches when putting together the script. Heartwarming at times and absolutely gut-wrenching at others, this game really never lets you feel like your beloved party members are safe. This is the first game I had played where themes of loss, sadness, and even death were as prominent a feature. The storytelling devices are clever, and not just for a video game. Other games at the time just did not have the depth that Square introduced with this iteration of the Final Fantasy series. There are a lot of themes that parallel great works of literature like Lord of the Rings series, kings being controlled by nefarious beings bent on total world domination, redemption of oneself from the very thing you've become over years of blind service, betrayal by the very friends you've grown to trust your entire life. It's all here. And this story is accompanied by one of the most amazing soundtracks to have ever been scored for a video game. Don't worry, Zelda series, I'm not forgetting you. Just starting up this game treats you to one of the most beloved video game scores of all time. The simplicity of the arpeggio at the beginning, followed by the awesome strings and instrumentation that comes in, just immediately puts the player in the perfect atmosphere for this game. Each instance of this game is masterfully scored, with the songs lending incredible weight to the story, unfolding in a gravity that I just don't think had been done before. And it's worth noting that a lot of these tracks that you hear in Final Fantasy II, also known as Final Fantasy IV, yeah, we get it, they live on in current and probably future Final Fantasy games, which right now we're at Final Fantasy 15, probably getting ready to go into 16, I don't know. Hurry it up. Get to it, Square Enix. We want it. story, and song, all setting the perfect backdrop for some of the most gorgeous 16-bit graphics of this era. While it's true that some of the top-down games of the 80s and the 90s were a bit on the bland side, the same can't be said for Final Fantasy II/4. Utilizing the Super Nintendo's extremely broad range of on-screen colors, Square designed an absolutely amazing piece of artwork with each location. Details were not scarce on set pieces, and an attention to design made each character and item iconic. While the characters were still a bit on the short side, which was pretty common for the era due to graphic limitations, they were nonetheless extremely expressive. The characters were all able to act out in anger, sadness, even shame at times. This within itself is an amazing feat in the 16-bit era. It's also a wonderful addition to have the portrait photos further represent what the characters looked like. It gave a real sense of identity to the cast, and each one has a unique look and feel to them. But the amazing graphic accomplishments did not stop there. The use of the Super Nintendo's own Mode 7 graphics mode added a completely unique style of travel via airship. The speed in which you could zip around the world was such a welcome enhancement to the genre. No longer were RPGs saddled with a slow trudge through the world, but you could now reach F-Zero speeds while exploring. This was nothing less than groundbreaking. Add all these awesome traits together and it's pretty damn easy to see why Final Fantasy II is one of my favorite games on the SNES, if not of all time. It may be a bit harder for the younger audience to actually understand and get and appreciate a game like this due to it being, a 16-bit game from the 90s, but I still wouldn't hesitate to recommend this for any adventurous gamer who wants to get into a deep and gorgeous story. All right. That's it for this episode of From the Vault. Be sure to subscribe, hit that alert bell, and give me a freaking like if you like this video. Until next time, peace.